I want you to imagine watching the civilization you've worshipped your entire life just, completely destroy itself.
Yeah, right in front of your eyes.
Exactly. Picture it. The year is 1941. You are looking at this 80-year-old Nobel laureate, and he's sitting at a heavy oak archival desk in Bengal.
And outside his window, the world is literally on fire.
It really is. I mean, Europe is tearing itself apart in the early, just devastating years of the Second World War.
Right.
And this man, who is a titan of literature, a philosopher who spent his whole life trying to bridge the East and the West, he is suddenly realizing something horrible.
That his entire worldview was flawed.
Right. That his fundamental belief in modern progress has been a meticulously crafted lie.
It's a staggering image to start with, honestly, because you're basically standing in the room with a man at the very end of his life, drafting a psychological autopsy of a dying world.
Welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is to open that exact devastating intellectual autopsy.
Which is such an important piece of history.
It is. We are unpacking a profoundly important document translated from Bengali. It's an address written by Rabindranath Tagore for his 80th birthday in 1941.
Titled Crisis in Civilization, or Sabhyatar Sankat in Bengali.
Right. And to really put you in the room with us for this, I want you to imagine the digital backdrop behind us in the studio right now, totally transforming.
Just fading away.
Yeah, the sleek modern panels dissolve, and suddenly we're looking at that 1941 desk. There's old, heavy parchment, glass ink pots, and, a fading sepia-tone photograph of Tagore himself.
Sitting there with the crushing weight of a global war on his shoulders.
Exactly. But what's crucial for you to understand right from the start is that we aren't just blowing the dust off an old museum relic here.
No, definitely not. The source material we have in front of us is actually this fascinating hybrid.
It really is.
It acts as a bridge between that dark moment in 1941 and our world today.
Right at the top of our source file, there's this digital iceberg logo.
Oh, the Wikisource logo.
Yeah, representing the open source online library. And sitting right next to that modern vector graphic is Tagore's actual sweeping, handwritten signature.
It's so intricate, looping, fiercely personal.
And right beside that is the Visva University crest, which is an institution he founded.
If you look closely at that crest, you see a central lotus flower framed by ancient swastika patterns.
Which we should clarify is the traditional Sanskrit symbol of well-being, long before it was corrupted by fascism in the West.
Right. It's a visual collision of eras. You have the ancient Sanskrit symbols, the 1941 ink signature, and the modern digital architecture all existing in the exact same frame.
And it goes even deeper than the logos.
Yeah.
The source includes a full ledger of modern volunteer contributors, plus Creative Commons licensing information.
Pegging this whole retrieval to the year 2026.
Exactly. So this isn't a dead document locked in a vault. It's a living digital artifact. It's been translated, typed, coded, and preserved by a global army of open source volunteers today.
Which really proves that the ideas in this 80-year-old text are still vibrating.
They still matter.
Right. They matter enough for people to dedicate their free time to ensuring you and I can read them right now.
So what does this all mean? We're framing this deep dive not just as an analysis of an old speech, but as a journey into the mind of a man who is frantically searching the rubble of his shattered beliefs.
Searching for a new kind of hope.
Exactly. Now, as we unpack this, you're going to hear some fierce praise for Soviet governance systems and some absolutely scathing, brutal takedowns of British imperial rule.
And that requires us to lay down some intellectual ground rules before we get into it.
Yes, please do.
Our job here is not to take a political side. We aren't endorsing any specific ideology, left-wing or right-wing.
Right.
Our mission is to put you directly behind Tagore's eyes in 1941. We're going to impartially report his exact observations to help you feel why he came to these conclusions.
Based on his lived reality at the time.
Exactly. We are treating his perspective as a primary historical source to synthesize a moment in time.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning of his life. Because Tagore opens this address by looking back at his youth.
Setting the stage.
He's 80 now, but he remembers what it felt like to be young, staring out at a horizon that felt, massive and expansive.
The world felt huge to him back then.
Yeah, just vibrating with endless potential. But as he writes this in 1941, looking back from the opposite end of his life, he feels that this horizon has tragically, painfully narrowed.
He describes this narrowing as a profound fragmentation.
Wow.
He says the perspective from his 80th birthday allows him to see the ultimate broken conclusion of his life's work and the mindset of his entire country.
So he's explicitly setting you up for a story of immense loss.
Yes, but to truly feel the weight of that loss, you have to understand the sheer scale of what he originally possessed.
Wait, hold on. I need to stop you there because what he originally possessed seems completely counterintuitive to me.
Also,
Well, Tagore was a colonized subject. He lived his entire life under British rule. Yet, he writes that in his youth, he and his educated Indian peers had a deep, almost romantic infatuation with the English.
they really did.
Why would they idolize the very people who were subjugating them? Wasn't there immense resentment?
It's a brilliant question, and it gets to the heart of how cultural imperialism actually functions. It wasn't just a reluctant political acceptance.
What was it then?
It was a wholesale cultural embrace. You have to imagine the environment of the educated Bengali elite in the late 19th century.
Okay.
They weren't just reading English literature, they were devouring it. Tagore specifically mentions how they were swept away by Shakespeare's plays and Byron's poetry.
Oh, wow. So it was an intellectual obsession.
Completely. They were intoxicated by the language, the rolling cadence of Macaulay's prose, and the grand liberal speeches of the British Parliament.
He actually points out the large-heartedness of John Bright's speeches in Parliament specifically.
Right. They were listening to these echoes from London and hearing a message of universal human victory.
But still, the cognitive dissonance there is wild to me.
Think about it this way. It was like being trapped in an incredibly toxic, one-sided, parasocial relationship.
Oh, that's interesting.
You know how people can fall in love with a celebrity based entirely on their carefully curated public relations profile?
Yeah, completely ignoring who they actually are behind closed doors.
Precisely. They were reading the PR.
Oh, that is a perfect way to look at it.
They believed that the path to independence for the conquered Indian nation would be paved by the sheer magnanimity of the victorious British.
So they thought the British were just going to hand it over.
They thought the English were so inherently noble, so fundamentally enlightened by the literature they produce, that they would eventually just grant India its freedom out of the goodness of their hearts.
Wow.
Tagore writes that they genuinely believed England was the ultimate refuge for the oppressed globally. They saw the English character as the highest representation of human friendship and goodwill.
He even admits he placed the English on an exalted throne in his heart.
It was the worship of a phantom ideal.
But to understand why they were so eager to worship this new foreign ideal, we have to look at what they were trying to escape from.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this. The actual translation of the word civilization. Because Tagore makes a very specific, crucial point about the linguistic gap between English and Bengali here.
He really does. Tagore notes that finding an exact Bengali equivalent for the English word civilization was historically impossible.
So they didn't even have a word for it.
When they finally translated civilization into Bengali as Sabhyatar, it was a modern adaptation. Ancient India didn't have a direct equivalent for this broad, universal concept of human civilization.
What do they have instead?
What they had was a concept called Sadachar, as defined by the ancient lawgiver Manu.
And Sadachar roughly translates to good conduct or the set of moral rules, right?
Roughly, yes. But what's fascinating here is the suffocating limitation of Sadachar.
Suffocating how?
Tagore explains that Sadachar was fundamentally a collection of social bindings and incredibly rigid rules. And crucially, it was geographically locked.
Wait, geographically locked? How can a moral code be tied to geography?
The source text notes that ancient beliefs confined this good conduct strictly to the land bordered by the Saraswati and Drishadvati rivers,
Okay.
a region known as Brahmavarta. If you stepped outside that physical geography, if you crossed the river, the rules of purity and good conduct supposedly no longer applied in the same way.
You're kidding.
No, you were suddenly impure just for leaving.
Let me just wrap my head around that. That is incredibly stifling. Your entire concept of morality, your definition of being a good person, is literally trapped between two riverbanks.
Yes.
If you travel, if you trade with the outside world, if you go share ideas with someone in the next valley, you are fundamentally committing a moral failing.
Exactly. It makes cross-cultural pollination almost impossible. Tagore argues that this system of Sadachar resulted in rigid, unyielding, and often deeply cruel social customs.
Because it couldn't adapt.
Right. It demanded adherence to tradition simply because it was tradition, regardless of how unjust or inhumane those customs might be to certain groups or castes.
Wow.
It prioritized outward performative behavior over inner intellectual freedom. It actively suppressed the mind to maintain social stasis.
Okay, when you explain it like that, suddenly the infatuation with the English makes total sense.
Right.
If you're a young, brilliant intellectual like Tagore, and your own culture's morality feels like a straitjacket tied to a river,
Yeah.
then reading about the English ideal of civilization, which claims to be universal, applicable to all humans everywhere, based on reason and justice, that wouldn't just be interesting. That would feel like a jailbreak for your mind.
That is exactly what it was. English education sparked a massive intellectual rebellion against this rigid satire.
So they just rejected the old ways entirely.
Tagore points out that the educated elite of his youth began to aggressively rebel against these external rituals and bindings. They replaced the suffocating rules of satire with the English ideal of civilization.
Which must have felt like a massive breath of fresh, liberating air.
They embraced it fully, not just politically, but in their daily lives, their beliefs, and their social behavior.
He says they accepted the dictates of logic and justice fully. They threw out the old rule book and adopted what they thought was a universal, enlightened way of being.
That was the honeymoon phase.
They were starry-eyed and completely invested. But, that infatuation had a geographic limit of its own.
How do you mean?
Well, it was easy to read Byron and debate Parliament speeches in a comfortable study in Calcutta. But the moment Tagore stepped outside that elite literary bubble and traveled into the rural Bengali countryside, the illusion shattered.
The transition in his worldview was absolutely brutal. He describes this moment when he was forced to look past the poetry and confront the actual, grinding reality of the Indian masses living under the British administration.
And the reality check he experienced was completely devastating.
It really was.
He saw poverty that was so deep, so systemic, that it defied his comprehension. The source text lists the stark deprivations he witnessed firsthand.
It wasn't just that people didn't have money.
No, it was a total engineered lack of basic food, a lack of clothing, a lack of health, and a complete absence of education.
Right.
He lists these absolute necessities for basic human physical and mental well-being and realizes they are entirely withheld from the masses.
He makes a chilling comparative observation here. He states that this level of agonizing widespread deprivation was unseen anywhere else in the modern governed world.
That's a heavy statement.
He says that while he had been comfortably absorbed in the illusion of British civilizational glory, he could never have imagined such a cruel and distorted version of it playing out in his own backyard.
And the mechanism behind this poverty, the why of it all, is what really broke him. Because Tagore wasn't naive. He understood the economics of the empire.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Tagore recognized that India was the economic engine of British global supremacy.
Right? They were funding the whole thing.
He notes that for an incredibly long time, India had continuously supplied the immense wealth that fueled the global majesty of the British Empire.
The raw resources.
The raw resources, the captive markets, the staggering human labor. The very riches that allowed Britain to build its grand institutions and sit comfortably at the center of the civilized world.
So the wealth was flowing out like a river. And what did India get in return? What did the people actually generating that wealth receive from the supposedly large-hearted English?
Utter callous indifference.
Tagore describes it as a boundless, contemptuous apathy directed at hundreds of millions of people. The civilization he had worshipped was actively starving the people who were funding its greatness.
Now, if we look at historical counterarguments, a common pushback, one that British apologists frequently raised during Tagore's time, and frankly, some still raise today, is the argument of infrastructure.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is the classic defense.
Right. The argument goes, didn't the British build institutions? Didn't they lay down thousands of miles of railways? Didn't they establish courts and bureaucratic systems?
We brought you the trains.
Exactly. Didn't they modernize the subcontinent?
But Tagore anticipates this exact argument, and his response dismantles it completely.
He really does.
He argues that the British did not bring true civilization. True civilization in Tagore's philosophical framework is built on genuine human connection, mutual respect, and the uplifting of the human spirit.
And instead of that?
Instead, the British merely installed a cheap mechanical substitute. They installed law and order.
And he deliberately uses the English phrase law and order in the Bengali text to emphasize that it was an imported, entirely external concept.
It wasn't organic at
He
all?
calls it an external mechanism. It maintains the status quo, it ensures the trains run on time so the resources can be extracted efficiently, but it does absolutely nothing to nurture the humanity of the people it governs.
Let me offer an analogy here, because
Ooh.
this distinction between civilization and law and order is so critical.
Sure, go ahead.
Imagine you live in a house, and someone aggressively takes it over. Now, a caretaker, someone bringing civilization, would fix the plumbing, buy groceries, make sure the heating works, and ensure you are healthy and thriving.
Right, they'd care for the inhabitants.
Exactly. But the occupier doesn't do that. Instead, they just hire a heavily armed security guard to stand at the front door.
To protect the property.
Right. The guard ensures no one else breaks in, and more importantly, ensures you don't make too much noise or try to leave. So, yes, technically the house is secure. There is a highly functioning system of law and order.
But inside?
Inside the house, you are freezing, starving, and sick. That guard isn't a caretaker. He's a warden protecting the property, not the people. It's an imposition from the outside, entirely devoid of actual humanity.
That is a phenomenal way to illustrate his point. And Tagore argues that this miserly focus on mere law and order actively blocked the path of organic progress for the Indian people.
Miserly is a great word for it.
He states that the miserliness of this approach, the deliberate refusal to offer true human connection or dignity, shut off any chance of real development. The British projected immense state power, but they completely hid their humanity.
Showing power while hiding humanity. That is the core of his shattered illusion. The mentor he thought he had turned out to be a warden extracting rent.
It's a devastating realization.
So what happens when your foundational worldview shatters like this? You don't just sit in the dark.
No, you try to make sense of it.
You start looking around, you look for other examples, you try to figure out if this is just the tragic nature of the modern world everywhere, or if India is being uniquely suffocated.
This prompts Tagore to look outward. I want you to picture the digital backdrop changing again.
Okay.
The archival desk and the inkpots fade away, and we are now looking at a massive, illuminated world map.
I love this visual.
Tagore is systematically shifting his gaze across the globe. He's explicitly comparing the tragic fate of India under British rule with the historical trajectories of other nations.
He takes us on a geopolitical world tour. And the first stop on this illuminated map is Japan.
Right. Tagore observes Japan with a complex mix of awe and deep geopolitical cynicism.
Awe, because they actually pulled it off.
Exactly. On one hand, he sees a definitive proof of concept. He sees an Eastern nation that successfully modernized. He notes that Japan adopted the tools of modern progress and, right before his eyes, became incredibly wealthy and powerful.
And the crucial variable here is that Japan did this while maintaining its sovereign independence.
They weren't a colony.
Right. It was free from the shadow of Western imperial dominance. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that an Asian nation could achieve the heights of modern capability without needing a European overlord to civilize them.
But, and this is important, Tagore does not romanticize Japan's rise. He issues a sharp, unsparing geopolitical critique.
Because what they did with that power.
Yes. He watched Japan utilize its newfound industrial and military power to swallow North China. He saw the naked imperial aggression of an Asian power brutally subjugating another Asian nation.
And this is exactly where Tagore's critique of English hypocrisy crystallizes, because he watches how England reacts to Japan's aggression in China.
They officially condemned it.
Loudly.
Yeah.
England condemned Japan's actions, calling out the blatant robbery with what Tagore describes as contemptuous arrogance. They took the moral high ground on the global stage.
But underneath that loud official condemnation, Tagore saw the mechanism of secret appeasement at play.
This is wild.
It's a vital piece of the historical puzzle. Tagore observed how England, in a calculated geopolitical move, cleverly closed a vital transit route, historically known as the Burma Road.
To appease Japan.
Yes. They essentially cut off a critical lifeline of supplies to the besieged Chinese, sacrificing China to protect their own imperial interests in the East, all while publicly pretending to be the moral arbiters of justice.
Explain that mechanism a bit more, because that is the exact moment the mask slips for Tagore, isn't it?
It really is. England condemned Japan because Japan was acting like an empire, which threatened British interests.
All right, they didn't want the competition.
But when push came to shove, England cared more about avoiding a conflict that might threaten its own colonies than it did about the lives of the Chinese people.
So they threw China under the bus.
So they closed the road, choking China's defense to keep Japan temporarily happy. Tagore calls out the sheer hypocrisy of a nation that lectures the world on civilization while secretly facilitating imperial conquest the moment it suits their strategic, self-serving interests.
It proved to him that British morality was entirely transactional.
Completely.
He does note, however, that a small group of English people did sacrifice themselves to aid China, showing that individual nobility still existed among the English. But as a state power, the facade was totally gone.
From the cynical geopolitics of East Asia, the illuminated map shifts again, this time highlighting the Soviet Union.
And it's important to note here that Tagore actually traveled to Moscow. So he is speaking from firsthand observation, not just reading news reports.
His account of the Soviet experiment is central to his entire critique of British India. When he visited Moscow, he was absolutely astounded by the sheer scale, speed, and ambition of what he witnessed.
What did he see that blew him away so much?
He observed an extraordinary, unsparing dedication by the state to rapidly spread education and healthcare among the vast masses.
Which was the exact opposite of what was happening in India.
Exactly. He writes that the ignorance, poverty, and self-denigration of a massive, historically disparate empire were being rapidly swept away by this concerted state effort.
He must have felt such a mix of emotions seeing that.
He felt a profound mix of envy and joy seeing it, knowing how starkly it contrasted with the intentional stagnation in India. But the most crucial observation he makes isn't just about building schools or hospitals.
What is it about?
It is about the mechanics of social cohesion.
This is a pivotal point in the text. He observed that under Soviet rule, Muslims and non-Muslims were sharing state rights and civic responsibilities without breaking out into conflict.
Yeah.
He saw a system where multiple ethnicities and religious groups, and he specifically mentions the large populations of Muslims in Soviet territories, were integrated into the governance structure equitably.
He explicitly and harshly contrasts this with the British approach in India. He accuses the British administration of actively crushing the manhood of their subjects to keep them permanently docile and subjugated,
while the Soviets were doing the opposite.
He says the Soviets, on the other hand, were working relentlessly to make these diverse populations strong and capable in every way, actively seeking their cooperation in the machinery of governance.
He notes that the Soviet influence, at least from what he observed during his visit, was not fundamentally disrespectful to the people, nor did it intentionally harm their basic humanity.
It wasn't, in his scathing words, the cruel, blood-sucking administration of a foreign machine.
Wow, blood-sucking. That is strong.
It was a system that, in his view, at that specific historical moment, sought to elevate the populace rather than merely extract from them.
Then the map shifts one more time, moving to the Middle East and Central Asia. He looks at Persia, which we now call Iran.
Right.
Tagore points out that Persia had historically been crushed between the grinding wheels of two competing European powers. But the moment Persia managed to forcefully extract itself from the tangled web of European machinations, it rapidly began to build a new, modern, functioning nation.
And the specific detail he highlights regarding Persia is incredibly revealing of his mindset.
About the religious violence.
Yes. He says that the historical deadly clashes between Zoroastrians and Muslims in Persia, clashes that seemed ancient, inevitable, and completely intractable, subsided significantly under their new independent government.
Just because the Europeans left.
He directly attributes the previous internal strife to the deliberate interference and meddling of European powers. He states that Persia's greatest good fortune was finally escaping the intrigues of European nations.
He even glances at Afghanistan, India's immediate rugged neighbor. He acknowledges that Afghanistan hasn't yet achieved the high standards of modern education or social policy that he wishes to see. Okay. But he asserts that its potential for greatness remains entirely intact. Why? For one simple, glaring reason. It remains untouched by the arrogant, suffocating domination of European civilization.
Because they're independent.
Because they are independent, they have the agency to slowly but surely move toward progress and freedom on their own terms.
It is a damning, meticulously constructed comparative analysis.
It really is.
Everywhere Tagore looks, Japan, Russia, Iran, Afghanistan, he sees movement, progress, or, at the very least, the raw potential for a future built by their own hands.
And then he looks back at his own home. He looks back at India. Which brings us to the most painful realization of the text, the internal wound.
Yeah, after soaring across the globe, observing sovereign nations charting their own destinies, the focus crashes brutally back down to the reality of India.
He describes his homeland as lying, helpless, and completely immobile.
Pinned to the ground by the dead weight of English administration.
But, the lack of external progress isn't even the deepest wound. The deepest wound is what is happening inside the society itself.
He brings up the most tragic, agonizing outcome of all, the unprecedented, cruel, communal violence erupting between Hindus and Muslims in India.
He calls it a barbaric internal strife, a societal sickness.
And he notes with heavy, pointed sorrow that this level of horrific, systemic internal violence simply does not exist in the independent Muslim countries he just referenced.
This raises an important question, and it's the question that clearly tormented Tagore. How did this violence get so bad?
Right.
Why is India, a civilization with thousands of years of ancient wisdom and cohabitation, suddenly tearing itself apart in the streets?
Tagore does not shy away from the answer, and it is the heaviest accusation in the entire document.
What does he say?
He implies, with forceful clarity, that this tragic, uncivilized outcome is no accident of nature. He states that if this daily escalating horror wasn't being secretly fostered by some hidden center of power at the highest, most cynical levels of the British administration, this shameful and barbaric consequence could never have taken root in Indian history.
Let's explain the mechanism of that accusation. He is accusing the imperial power of a deliberate strategy of divide and rule, isn't he?
Yes. The mechanism is simple but devastating. An empire cannot easily control a united populace of hundreds of millions.
Right, they just overthrow you.
Exactly. But if you can subtly, systematically inflame historical tensions through selective patronage, disproportionate political representation, and stoking religious insecurities, the colonized people will fight each other instead of fighting the colonizer.
So they were weaponizing the demographics.
Tagore refuses to believe that Indians are somehow inherently less capable of peaceful coexistence than the Persians or the Russians. The variable, he argues, is the suffocating blanket of British rule that actively prevents unity to maintain its grip on power.
He says the profound danger is that the outside world will look at India and blame the Indian society itself for this misery.
They'll say, look at these uncivilized people killing each other.
Exactly, completely ignoring the hidden imperial hand that deliberately stirs the pot.
It is the ultimate betrayal of his youthful ideals. The civilization that promised universal enlightenment through the words of Shakespeare and Byron is, in reality, secretly breeding communal slaughter just to keep its administrative grip on power.
You would think at this point, after realizing that your country is being bled dry economically and deliberately fractured socially, that Tagore would just hate everything English.
You'd assume he'd be consumed by an unyielding, bitter xenophobia toward the entire nation.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
It's a beautiful, deeply resonant contradiction that speaks to his profound humanity.
I agree.
Despite his relentless, analytical hatred for the British imperial system and its mechanical cruelty, Tagore flatly refuses to hate the English people as individuals.
He makes a very deliberate point in the text to talk about his deep, enduring personal friendships with what he calls large-hearted Englishmen. And he names one man specifically who serves as the anchor for his soul, C.F. Andrews.
Right. For context, Charles Freer Andrews was an English missionary, an educator, a social reformer, and a very close, intimate friend of both Tagore and Mahatma Gandhi.
Oh, wow.
For Tagore, Andrews was not just a friend. He was a living, breathing symbol. Tagore describes Andrews with immense reverence as the true Englishman, the true Christian, and the true human.
He talks about Andrews with such palpable love. He writes that in his youth he had completely surrendered his heart to the illusion of the English character through the proxy of their literature.
Right.
But in his old age, as that illusion turned to ashes, it was C.F. Andrews who stepped in and helped him rescue that belief from total ruin.
Andrews proved, through his daily actions and sacrifices, that the nobility Tagore had imagined wasn't entirely a fiction.
It existed in individuals, even if it was entirely absent in the machinery of the state.
Tagore notes that the memory of Andrews's fearless, selfless magnanimity shines even brighter after Andrews' death. Andrews serves as a philosophical lifeline.
A lifeline he desperately needed.
Tagore explicitly states that if he had not seen and intimately known people like Andrews, his despair regarding Western civilization would have been absolute, final, and unchallenged.
Andrews prevented Tagore from succumbing to a total nihilistic hatred of the West.
It is a staggering testament to Tagore's own largeness of heart.
It really is. Even as his country is being exploited and deliberately torn apart by an empire, he insists on separating the brutal, unfeeling machinery of the state from the genuine soul of the individual.
He refuses to let the empire steal his capacity to love its citizens.
But even with that personal solace, the global picture in 1941 was terrifying. And this brings us to the final movement of the document, the apocalyptic vision and the prophecy.
We have to firmly ground ourselves in the exact historical moment this ink was drying on the page. It's 1941.
The middle of the war.
World War II is raging with unimaginable ferocity. Tagore is looking out at Europe, the very continent that had arrogantly lectured the rest of the world on the meaning of civilization for centuries. And what does he see them doing?
He sees a pandemic of cruelty. He sees naked, mechanized barbarism sweeping the globe, showing its fangs in London, in Berlin, across the oceans.
He says the mask of European civilization has completely, permanently fallen off.
The continent that claimed to be the pinnacle of human evolutionary achievement is now engaged in an unprecedented industrialized slaughter.
Polluting the very atmosphere with the degradation of the human spirit.
He looks at this global carnage, this moral bankruptcy of the West, and then he looks back at the British Empire in India. And from this vantage point, he makes a dark, inevitable, historically accurate prophecy.
What is his prediction?
He states with absolute certainty that the turning of the wheel of fortune will dictate that one day the British will be forced to leave India. Their empire will inevitably end.
But his haunting question is this: what will they leave behind when the music finally stops and they pack up to go?
Right.
He envisions the aftermath of centuries of extractive rule, and he predicts they will leave behind a heap of garbage.
A heap of garbage. That's a devastating image.
A massive, impoverished, structurally ruined husk of a once great civilization. He says that when the stream of their administration finally dries up, it will leave behind an unbearable expanse of mud and filth.
It is a vision of absolute heartbreaking desolation. The civilization he believed in as a boy has bankrupted itself globally through war and ruined his homeland locally through extraction and division.
He says on his day of departure, meaning his impending death, his faith in that Western civilizational gift is completely, undeniably bankrupt.
It is incredibly bleak. He is standing at the edge of his life looking at a literal world war and a starved, fractured homeland.
But we have to remember who wrote this. Right.
This is Rabindranath Tagore. He is a poet, a philosopher, and a humanist to his very core. He refuses, even in the face of all this evidence, to let the document end on despair.
This is the philosophical climax of the entire address. Despite the absolute ruin surrounding him, Tagore makes a profound, defiant declaration.
He states that it is a sin to lose faith in humanity.
A sin.
He vows to hold on to that faith until his very last breath, regardless of what the British Empire or their Axis powers do.
He anchors this radical hope in the deep past, quoting in an ancient Sanskrit verse.
The verse he includes is deeply resonant and serves as his ultimate rebuttal to the violence of his time. It translates to, unrighteousness may prosper temporarily, it may appear to win, but it is ultimately destroyed at its very roots.
It's a cosmic, long-term view of justice.
Yes. He is saying that the current barbarism, no matter how heavily armed or seemingly invincible, is inherently unstable because it is fundamentally unrighteous. It carries the seeds of its own destruction. And from that cosmic view, he crafts a poetic, almost messianic ending. He envisions a new dawn for human history. But this dawn is emphatically not coming from the West.
He specifically says the arrival of the great human, the Mahamanov, the savior, the voice of true, uncorrupted civilization, will come from the East, from the public.
He imagined this figure arriving at the impoverished huts of the oppressed, bringing a message of ultimate hope and liberation.
He deeply believes that one day, the unvanquished human will overcome all colonial and systemic obstacles and march forward to reclaim their lost dignity.
He simply refuses to accept that the endless, unredeemable defeat of humanity is the final truth. To believe that, he says, is an intellectual crime.
It gives you chills. It is a defiant prophecy of hope born out of the absolute depths of despair.
And that brings us to the end of the document, but not the end of our deep dive. Let's synthesize the incredible emotional and intellectual arc you just explored with us today.
We have traced the psychological journey of one of the 20th century's most brilliant minds. We watched him start with a naive, almost romantic idolatry of a foreign culture, seduced by the soaring rhetoric of literature and grand political ideals.
And then we saw that illusion painfully shattered by the bitter daily realization of systemic economic exploitation, absolute poverty, and the deliberate, cynical fostering of internal societal violence.
We followed him on a global tour, witnessing the mechanisms of imperial hypocrisy and observing the raw potential of independent nations charting their own course.
We felt his personal heartbreak anchored and saved from total nihilism only by the genuine love of a few good friends who proved humanity still existed.
And finally, we stood with him in 1941, looking at a world literally on fire, hearing him declare that despite the overwhelming ruin, humanity will survive and a new, true civilization will rise from the East.
It is a powerful reminder that history is not just a dry collection of dates and treaties. It's the lived, agonizing, and intensely hopeful experience of human beings trying to make sense of the massive systems that govern and often crush them.
And that leaves us with a final lingering thought for you to mull over. It's something to take with you as you close this deep dive and look around your own world today.
Tagore realized, through immense pain, that imposing mere law and order was a hollow, destructive substitute for genuine human civilization.
Law and order is a security guard. It keeps the peace, protects property, and enforces compliance.
But true civilization is a caretaker. It nurtures the human spirit, fosters genuine connection, and values human thriving above mere efficiency.
So as you look at the modern world around you right now, with our highly regulated, algorithmically controlled digital spaces, our increasingly rigid corporate structures, and our automated, frictionless systems of governance, ask yourself,
Are we still making the exact same mistake today? Are we pouring all our energy and innovation into building inescapable, hyper-efficient systems of law and order, while completely forgetting how to actually build civilization?
are we just hiring better, more technologically advanced security guards for a house where the people inside are slowly starving for true human connection?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the structures around you, keep looking for the humanity inside the machinery, and we will see you next time.